is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, hello. This is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks, events, happenings in the world of politics, news, international news, technology, health, everything that we interact with on a daily or weekly basis. And we look at it from a higher perspective. And from a higher perspective, of course, I'm talking about taking a spiritual or perhaps a metaphysical approach, taking a step back and looking at the world that we are creating, understanding that we are creating it, and going within to understand that, to take our energy from it and to embrace it. I started doing this program because of the unprecedented information bombardment we now have in this world. Pardon me. Where we have 24-hour news channels. We have information coming from us from all kinds of directions because of our technologies, because of our ability to send data, collect data at an instantaneous pace. All of these things have speeded up, the information flow, which of course speeds up our cognitive functions and our intellectual awareness. And ultimately, the good part of it is ultimately speeds us along on our journey of evolution, of our evolving journey, and that includes spiritual evolvement. But I started this because in being bombarded with so many stories, and many of them having elements to them that are disturbing, and decidedly disturbing, and on purpose. In other words, the news outlets that are the gatekeepers for much of the news that we do interact with are money-making organizations, and they choose to present stories that are things that are going to grab people's attention so that they can get ratings and make more money. And all too often the things that grab our attention are of a rather disturbing variety, whether you think of them as negative stories or more salacious types of stories, that kind of thing. So, many people who are consider themselves spiritual and on a spiritual path have tried and said that, I'm just going to disconnect from media, because all of the media is, they're just putting out these negative stories. And, well, as I've said, that's one way to do it. And, good luck to you if you try to do that. But as I've always said, unless you are willing to live on a mountaintop and, disconnect from the rest of the world, you're going to, at some point, be interacting with these. And my contention was that, trying to disconnect from them actually disadvantages you. You have an opportunity to really do some work and get, some spiritual awareness by going into these situations. running away from them just gives them more power over you and takes more energy from you. So, that's the focus behind this. Over the past year or so, I've been focusing on what I call the transition era, which is where we are today. We are living in a time when, and as I've said, things have speeded up, mostly due to our technology, but also due to a rapidly expanding consciousness and awareness of everything from scientific breakthroughs on the quantum physics level to awareness of how interconnected we really are as a planet. These things have brought us to a point where seeds have been planted for radical, well, not only social change, but change in the way that we perceive the world. And because of certain elements in play, and I've used astrology to help illustrate that, and I will get back to that in a bit, but basically we are going through a period of change that isn't a change that is 1 or 2 steps forward and 2 steps back kind of thing, where there's a push and pull, and the planets that represent that, in astrology are Uranus, which is the planet of revolution, and Pluto, which is the planet of, repression, control, death, and rebirth, and so on. And these two are interplaying to make these changes. I think I explained also that when the two planets work congenially together in aspects that we call trines in astrology, then change flows very, very swiftly and cleanly, much like what happened during the 60s and 70s when those two planets were conjunct. Now the two planets are at odds with each other. So this is a different way of creating change. It's a refining process where, it's being fine-tuned. So you're getting what feels like momentary changes and then a pullback. But what's really happening is this sort of refinement process. So that's the era that we live in. Today's subject is death and life, or life and death in the transition era. And you may think, well, how different are life and death going to be? How are they going to be different in the transition era? Life and death are pretty much the same and always have been. Well, perhaps yes, but our understanding of them is what we're talking about. Life and death have always been considered to be the biggest mysteries, on the planet. And our understanding of them as they change is important. And I wanted to talk about this, particularly the death aspect of it, because of a year in which, people have been remarking at the number of very highly visible deaths that have happened since the beginning of this year. And so I wanted to talk about that, and one death in particular of someone who was not a huge celebrity, but a celebrity in his own right. Certainly someone who had an impact on my life, and the unusual passing. As I say, and I've said often on this show, everybody, as we are creating our life on the metaphysical level, we also create our deaths. And everyone who passes in a way that has something to say, or I think a message for us, or something in line with who and what they were and why they were here. And so I'm going to talk about that in relation to these, in some ways, overwhelming and certainly numerous deaths of famous people, if you will. But before I do that, I wanted to talk about, in relation to how we either try to disconnect from media stories or embrace them. This is from Madison Taylor's Daily Ohm website, and it struck me as I read it today as being a good explanation of what we do in relation to, news stories on this program. So the title of it is Resistance Equals Persistence, the Wisdom of Surrender. We all know the feeling of being repeatedly haunted by the same issue, no matter how we try to ignore it, avoid it, or run away from it. Sometimes it seems that we can get rid of something we don't want by simply pushing it away. Most of the time, the more we push away, the more we get pushed back. The laws of physics and metaphysics that explain this phenomena, which is often summed up in this pithy phrase, that which you resist persists. So resistance tends to strengthen the energies it attempts to oppose by giving them power and energy to work against us. Additionally, resistance keeps us from learning more about what we resist. In order to fully understand something, we must open to it enough to receive its energy. Otherwise, we remain ignorant of its lessons. That's why I say we go into these stories to learn more about them, but learn more about ourselves and take our energy back from them. So Ms. Taylor gives the story of a Tibetan monk who has retreated to meditate in a cave only to be plagued by demons, and he tries to get rid of them. Everything he tries. He tries chasing them, fighting them, hiding away from them, shooing them to get out of his cave. And finally, the thing that works is surrender. He simply lets them be, and then they disappear. So that's what we do. We accept things that might be, and at first, push our buttons. But then we get past the button pushing through our acceptance of them, through our surrender to them. And then we go in and we take the lessons and the energy from it. And then it no longer can bother us. So, just a little extra insight on that issue before we continue on with our discussion here about passing. So, what we have been remarking upon is what seems like an inordinate number of high-profile passings that we have had this year. So just to emphasize that point, since the year began in January, we've lost several very iconic musicians, including David Bowie, who we lost on January 10th. It was a huge passing for a lot of us. And then, I'm sorry, so I'm just, it really is amazing. I'm going through all of these. I have the list here on my website here. But David Bowie passed. Then course, Prince passed just recently, a couple of weeks ago. We had the passing of Glenn Frey of the Eagles on January 18th, just a couple of weeks after David Bowie. Paul Kantner. Now, that was less of a surprise because he was much older, but still, he was one of the founding members of the Jefferson Airplane. He passed all in that same month of January. Then Maurice White, another gentleman who was older, but still, he passed in early February. And of course, as I mentioned, Prince, another very high-profile passing. But besides musicians, we've also lost a lot of iconic actors and people very suddenly and unexpectedly. Including Patty Duke, who passed in March. Gary Shandling, comedian, very well-known comedian, star of the Larry Sanders Show and the Gary Shandling Show earlier in the 80s. So these passings, and Merle Haggard, by the way, sorry for country music fans. Now, he was an older gentleman too. So perhaps his passing is not quite so much of a surprise as the younger ones that pass, quite suddenly. But in any case, one begins to have a sense of, or a thought about, why these people are passing at such young ages, too. And most recently, the passing of Michelle McNamara, was the wife of comedian Patton Oswalt. Died in her sleep at 46. She was a crime writer, and she wrote true crime diaries and things like that. So now on to the person I wanted to discuss today. Now, as I've mentioned, I am someone who appreciates astrology and understands a lot of it, not all of it, but for many, many years I've been a fan and a student of astrology. And one of the astrologers that I came to really admire, and certainly read his daily horoscopes and his insights, which have always been quite quite inspiring and impactful, and unlike your usual horoscopes that you'd read in the newspaper about you're gonna meet someone with red hair today or something like very superficial kinds of things. He always went in a little bit deeper and a little bit more spiritually in his approach to horoscopes. And he was a British astrologer by the name of Jonathan Cainer. And you can read his forecasts and read about him at his website, which is Cainer, CAINER.com. And one of the things that he would do on his website, as he posted his daily horoscopes, on the front page of the website, he'd have a discussion. And usually he would take letters from, fans who had questions for him about certain aspects of astrology or certain, things that were going on in the world. Or often people would ask him, what he foresaw as far as who was going to win what election and so forth and so on, which, by the way, he rather modestly declined to participate in for the most part. But Jonathan had posted a letter he got from one of his fans asking about was there an astrological reason, did he think, for the number of celebrity passings that had happened? And, he had posted that, and usually he posts and then he encourages people to come back to the website the next day to see what his response is going to be. And so his response to that letter, after thinking about it and looking into the situation, he noticed that the planet Pluto, which in astrological terms is, the representation of, death and life and transition, that Pluto was in a position now, astrologically, that that it had never been in our awareness of it, because Pluto was a planet that was only recently found in 1930 or so. And Pluto is a very, very slow-moving planet. And it takes, I can't remember exactly how long, but I think it's something like 200 or more years for it to do an entire revolution around what they call the zodiac, going through all the signs of the zodiac. So, since our discovery of Pluto in 1930, it has yet to make a full revolution. So, Pluto, in different positions that it has never been in before, may bring new awarenesses. And on top of that, we have this mysterious planet 9, which is a planet we can't see, but we know is there. So, I mean, how resonant is that when you start talking about life after death and death and so forth and so on? And Mr. Kaner, I believe on this show, I read his take on this Planet 9 phenomenon, this discovery, and how he thought it was going to bring new revelations about dimensions in our world. So, in any case, his response then to this woman's question was that perhaps it had something to do with Pluto's position right now, which was radically different than it's been before. So bear with me. I'm trying to find the actual quote here. Yeah, here it goes. So Wednesday, April 27th, Life and Death is his posting here. Many have been talking about the unprecedented number of celebrity deaths so far this year. What explains this? As I mentioned recently, it's not the kind of question an ethical astrologer would normally ask. Our work focuses on birth and life. We don't predict the date or cause of anyone's demise, not least because we risk creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. My ancient predecessors, of course, had no such qualms, as I shall explain, and also point out where I suspect, if there is an astrological correlation to this situation, it is most likely to be found. So then he goes on to say that modern astrologers don't do things like predict the date of someone's demise, but the ancients did, because of the idea of, there were differing ideas, and there wasn't the thought of the self-fulfilling prophecy in which someone would actually create their own death. So he says, even if our predecessors had genuine knowledge, they were unaware of the slow, moving outer planets that had been discovered since 1781. If there is any astrological explanation for the recent sorry spate of celebrity deaths, I suspect it is linked to something in these cycles. And he's talking about planets such as Pluto and Uranus and Neptune. These are the outer, slower moving planets that tend to be indicative of longer term trends. So, that post, in which he's explaining why possibly, celebrity deaths are linked to that, was posted on Thursday, April the 28th. And on Monday, May 2nd, the very next week, Jonathan Cainer passed away at the age of 59, quite suddenly. Apparently it was a heart attack, but he had a heart attack before and had recovered, and there wasn't, doctors had thought that, he was doing quite well, but he passed away. And the fact that he passed away so soon after posting, a comment like that about the cycles of astrology, that to me, and how they might be linked to celebrity deaths, that to me was a huge message. Because here's this man now, he's not a huge celebrity like David Bowie, but he's celebrity to myself and others who, regarded his forecasts and so forth, and listened to him. And here he is passing. So what does that mean? What does it all mean? Well, and what does it mean for the transition era? And, back to the original question is, how could the idea of death be different in our transition era in which we're living through? Well, death in and of itself is transition, right? I mean, when people talk about death, they often say when someone dies, he or she made their transition. So what do we transition to? Well, from a metaphysical perspective, and from my point of view, since we are energy, and since we are creating this world, and we create the bodies or the little avatars we inhabit to play this game of life on Earth, when we quote-unquote die or pass, we transition. Our energy transitions. Now, where or to what does it transition? Well, that is a bit of a mystery, but that's what I think will change in the transition era. And the reason I think that will change is because we will become more aware of dimensions or aspects of our world that have previously been invisible to us. Scientists are working now and making strong headway in actually being able to observe dark matter and learn about it. Dark matter, for those of you who don't know, in science, in quantum physics, dark matter is 90% of our world, which we cannot see, but scientists are aware exists and connects us and is all around us. It's similar, if you want to think of it as, the Force in Star Wars. We don't understand it, we can't see it, We can't observe it, but we can observe its effects as it affects things that we do observe. And as we become more aware of those dimensions, those things that are invisible now or will be previously invisible as the transition era continues and we continue to evolve and expand in our consciousness, we will be able to see into worlds. We will be able to see into dimensions. We'll have, I think, more understanding, at least, if not more concrete proof, of things like multiverses, which is a theory in physics that supposes that we are living simultaneously different lives. With each choice that we make is a different life. So conceivably, there is a you that lived their life after they made the decision to, let's say, go to college. And then there is a you that lives a life in another universe, where you made the decision not to go to college, so on and so forth. Or you made the decision to eat in or out, and that changes your sort of timeline. So the multiverse theory is something that we may very well see get more concrete proof of. And as for the passings of these people, when there's a great deal of energy, group energy, focused on people, as I said, their passing tends to have a message for us. Varying messages depending on the personality involved. But at the broader level, if you want to look at why all of these are happening, in a relatively brief period of time, I think it's a harbinger of this change. And that the energies of these amazing people who came to this particular aspect of the world to inspire and change and create, their energies are now needed elsewhere. As different energies come in to help us with where we are now going. That to me is the best explanation that I can think of, and that is very much linked to the movements of those slower planets that Jonathan was talking about, the Pluto and Uranus, that have to do with social trends, political trends, long-term humanity and its evolving qualities. And that also has to do with the transition era and the interplay that I mentioned between Pluto, which is the slowest moving planet, and Uranus, and how over this long period of years, their interplay is causing the seeds of these changes to happen. So that to me is how and where it's all connected. And I wish to honor the passing of Jonathan Kainer. He's an extraordinary person. As far as being an astrologer was, I didn't know him personally, but I certainly know his work, and the amount of insight and intelligence and energy and wit that he brought to his work was exemplary. He didn't just knock out a forecast every day. He really looked at these trends and thought about them and connected them to a humanity, a humanness that very rare for astrologers or anybody else in that business. And I don't think that we'll see his like again. But I encourage you to go to his website, Kainer.com, and take a look at his past work and his current forecast. He's written many forecasts ahead of time, so they're still posting them on the website, and will be for some time to come. And I believe that he has a nephew that is going to be taking the reins once those forecasts have been finished. So rest in peace, Jonathan Kainer, and all the other lights of this world that have transitioned, and hopefully their energies are now focused elsewhere, continuing to help our world evolve and make it a better place for all involved. So until next time,